Thank you very much. I have to say, I keep getting invited to AIA meetings and very technical panels, although my technical expertise is getting lower and lower all the time. But I hope I can entertain you a little bit with the lecture I'm going to do. I wanted to add also that I'm in associate faculty of Michigan Robotics and Michigan Computer Science. These guys are the scientists. I'm just the architect. So they actually inform us and explain to us what we're trying to achieve in architecture. So I would like to begin with a little bit of a statement about neural architecture. This is sort of like a field of interrogation that I've been looking into for the last several years, which I tried also to summarize in this book. So I'm going to really briefly go over this. If you want to have more information, please rely on some of the publications. Neural architecture basically interrogates possibilities to look into architectural data sets that can be historical, can be contemporary, and then extract features and elements that we can use for architectural design. But let's first ask a very specific question or an important question. Why use AI at all? At all, for anything that you can think about, right? And in architecture, of course. There's a short answer for that. It's better to teach machines how to learn instead of how to do things. It's better to teach machines how to learn instead of how to do things. And I'm going to apologize right away to Maria Jablonina for showing again an industrial robot in a second, but I think it's important. So until the 1960s, cars were primarily produced like this, right? You had experts who knew how to weld cars together, how to assemble pieces, how to paint them, how to finish them up. In 1961, General Motors introduced the first industrial robot on an assembly line called Innovate. That basically changed the game, I would say. And then we saw this. The assembly line is not as clean as the one that Maria showed, but it's I think, very close to reality. But I want to make another argument. I agree with Maria, actually, that if you produce architecture like this, it probably would be cars. But what I want to show here is the idea that in these 50 plus years that the car industry has been producing with industrial robots, they also collected millions and millions of data points of what welding is, or where to weld specific models. And you can take these millions of data points to basically train industrial robots not to weld specific robots, specific cars or specific models, but to understand what, generally speaking, welding means. What is a good welding point? Thus, changing the entire way how we produced along an assembly line like this, because it would also mean that every single car that comes along that assembly line can be a different model. We don't have to retrain the robot. We don't have to put these expenses that are in training machines to do that. So this is for the technical part. And now for the cultural part. I would like to point to the rise of neural art. You might have seen this painting before. This is the portrait of Edmond de Bellamy by the Paris-based artist group Obvious, which sold at Christie's 2018 for around $430,000. It is allegedly the first completely AI-generated piece of art. I think this is an assessment that an art historian in the future will have to do. I don't think we can do this now. But the interesting part is not so much how it was produced, but rather the questions that came along with it. Like, where's the agency in this painting? Is it producing a new sensibility? What is with the authorship within that sort of realm of art? And all these questions really became important in terms of understanding that the relationship between artistic production and human input is starting to change. The same, of course, also accounts for producing architectural design, generally speaking. And what I'm very excited about is that it is not only affecting visual arts, it's really affecting music, it's affecting poetry, it's affecting, of course, architectural production. So the ways that we're starting to produce those artifacts that we called until now art is starting to change. So we're starting basically to collaborate with machines on creating this form of artifacts. Around the same time in 2018, we also experimented for the first time around with data sets of Gothic architecture, trying to extract features that are interesting, innovative, provocative to us in the office and trying to put them into use in our designs. But apart from these ideas of creating the data sets, which I just mentioned, the data set you just saw before was specifically designed by us for this purpose. But we also have to be aware that the vast majority of data sets do have racial biases, cultural biases, and gender biases today. We have the chance as the architecture discipline, because we're rather new in this game, to avoid those mistakes that were done in the last 30, 40 years in the creation of data sets by sharing the information better than it was done before. To this end, I would like to say that labeling is a political act, and we should be very aware about what data and what data we're using and how we are basically collecting that. Not many people are really aware of the problem. When we started to do for the first time sections based on data sets of thousands and thousands of sections that we scraped online because we didn't know better, I was really excited about the first results because they looked different, they looked strange, they looked somewhat provocative, they somehow triggered my imagination as an architect. I thought this, okay, great, I solved the problem of automating sections. But if you look closer into them, every one of you is a trained architect, you will see that they do not work, right? They are illusions of sections, they're imitations of sections, but the problem being that the semantic information in those data sets is missing to make a machine understand basically what is a section of a lecture hall or of a toilet or a living room. And the same also accounts for plants, of course. So this means also that we need to up the game in that area. On a theoretical level, I would say that these strange plans and sections that we just saw before are proof that there is something like estrangement and defamiliarization happening in the results that we get out of AI-driven systems. This is an art theory from the early 20th century, was proposed by Viktor Shklovsky, a Russian formalist who wrote a paper in 1918 called Art as Technique, where he proposed the idea of estrangement. And estrangement for him means, for example, creating a very common and normal situation and adding something that is so different and strange that it will provoke your attention. Bertolt Brecht used this technique very often in his plays, and I will talk about in a minute about Sigmund Freud, who actually also talked about a similar method, a similar thing in a paper named The Uncanny, where he described a similar effect. That basically you can take a data set of brutalist buildings and make a latent walk of it, and you will recognize features in there that are familiar to you as architects of brutalist buildings. But once you start, for example, to pollute that data set with Picasso paintings, suddenly you have something that is a little bit different, but at the same time also provocative and different and estranged. I think that this specific methodology is quite useful for what we're doing in design. I'd like to take this example to explain this in a little bit more detail. Every one of you will recognize very particular features in this villa that are familiar to you. Cantilevered concrete elements, long, narrow windows, like very much modern features that are familiar to you. But at the same time, what's going on on the ground? What's happening there? Is it like growing out of the ground? Is it carved out of the ground? Was it, I don't know, chiseled out of the ground? And then the same with the roof line, right? Is it damaged? Is it intentional, right? You don't really know exactly, is it really like a design intention or an accident? And these are exactly those moments of estrangement that provoked your attention. I've said a couple of times that I think this is the first genuinely 21st century design method that we're experiencing, like generally speaking, designing with artificial intelligence. Why do I say that? If you think about computational design, generally speaking, and please, I mean, I know some of you will disagree with me, but nonetheless, for the last 23 years, what we've been doing is we have not developed actually new methods. We have actually refined methods that already existed in the 20th century, late 20th century, right? It became better, faster, more precise, and so on, but it was not really something new, right? Parametricism, agent-based modeling, polygon modeling, NURBS modeling, all those methods were already out there in the 20th century, BIM including, yeah? So this, what we see now, was not even possible 5 years ago, yeah? Let me give you a couple of more concrete examples. This is a project that we designed for Michigan Robotics. They just built a new building and they wanted us to create something called the Robot Garden just next to it, which is basically the testing ground for their bipedal and quadrupedal pedal robots. And they gave us the requirement that it has to have a variety of different ground conditions and that it has to have steps and varying steps. What they're testing here is the so-called last 100-step problem, which is when you want to do automated robotic delivery to houses the last 100 steps from the delivery van to the entrance of the house is the most difficult one for robots. What we did to do this is we applied a variety of different methods we were exploring at the time, things like style transferring, 2D to 3D style transfer, deep dreaming, and so on. We created our own data sets of various ground conditions. Let me here. So satellite images of different grounds, and then basically using those to create style transferring and deep dreaming on the site. And then we got like a variety of different results. This is the interesting thing about using AI, is the amplification of the possibility to create variations. This is one of my most favorite results because it is completely unusable for humans, but I think that the robots somehow were interested in something that is not usable by humans. It is actually pretty close to Maria was talking about before about designing with machines, and this one basically is designing with machines for machines, right? Because this is not for humans, that thing here. This is for robots, this whole garden. A quick look into text-to-image generations. This would be a longer conversation, normally speaking, but let me show you a couple of early projects that we tried in that area. In 2020, we participated in a competition in Shenzhen for a school for about 3,000 students, and we used, for the first time, a text-to-image generator in a very primitive role. It was far away from what it can do now. It was more really creating blotches and weird figures. And we used those strange results on the site to basically create a very primitive translation between 2D image to 3D by just extruding color blotches. So we just extruded those color blotches to create the buildings on the site. This was really like a first test in the area of understanding, can we use something that uses text as a design method to create a physical result out of it. I think we got third or fourth, something like that. So we didn't win it, but it was an interesting exercise. I want to say that we very often use competitions as an excuse to test something. So it's not necessarily that we want to win it. It's great if you win it, that's awesome. But it is like finding an excuse to really go through the whole process of designing in architecture. And then early 2022, I saw the first image, the new diffusion model. So this one was actually done with Disco Diffusion. One of the early, it's incredible. You talk about early last year and you say like, it's an early method of using that. It's like 1.5 years ago, it's crazy. But I want to say one thing which is very architectural about this approach of using diffusion models is that it amplifies what we as architects do all the time, which is working through variations. These are 28 models from the Atelier Hans Hollein from 2004 that demonstrate basically this idea of exploring the design space with variations. What diffusion models do is they amplify that. So this is, for example, an image that I put together last year. I did a little calculation then that from April 2022 to August 22, I generated 74,000 images in Midjourney. And I was not even a power user. There were people who did even more than that. Yeah, but it just shows how this actually amplifies this. This is an image that we had on show in an exhibition right now in Vienna, which consists of 21,000 of those generated images, and also the gradient background was actually designed by, like, using one of the diffusion models. So it's just a method of really amplifying that. Being in Chicago, I wanted to show this here. What happens if you prompt one of those diffusion models to create a Mies van der Rohe building? It actually produces quite convincing results. And this is sort of like the dark side of this, is that this tool is a fantastic tool for lazy architects or lazy artists, generally speaking. Yeah. What is it when you try to, and it changes over time. Like, I want to jump over this to keep the presentation a bit shorter, but I wanted to show you this here. The most beautiful house in the world. This is Midjourney version 2 in May last year. Okay, and let me show you the evolution or devolution of this system. This is the version 4, which came out in November last year with the same question, the most beautiful house in the world. So if we see those results, I don't think any architect has to be afraid that he's going to lose his job. I don't think that's going to happen. We're still needed some way. But you still can use it very creatively too. And when I say creatively, I don't mean that the machine is creative. What happens very often is that the machine produces outputs that are strange and different, as I mentioned before. They provoke your mind, right? So what happens is that we project our own creativity into the results that we see. It doesn't mean the machine is creative. This is another proof of concept project that we did for a shopping center in Vienna, where we also put together, I like brutalism, I admit it, I like brutalism. So I put again like this brutalism data set together, and we created a latent walk, but we were interested in like, how can I translate this now into a three-dimensional model? So we actually produced something called a pixel projection, which produced what you see here on the left side. I'm going to jump over the deep house, which is a similar approach, just for a smaller project, and go into the last project here in this series, which is the dog house, which was on show recently at the MAC in Vienna, where we really, for the first time, tried to extract those features from a diffusion model image and then create a physical object out of it. And we were really interested in the fabrication of this object, just to make sure that we can get something done that is not just an image, as like all these diffusion models are getting used now, but really creates a three-dimensional physical object at the end, and maybe provides a more tangible result of what this could be architecturally. Oh, yes, and it's called the dog house because it's populated by 2 robotic dogs that are like walking around in there. Yeah, kids love them. So it was, yeah, it was fun. Okay, and with these images, I would like to leave you and wait for the discussion that we're going to have in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.